Hello everyone and welcome back. For those of you who may not know, my name is Cheyenne, and today I'll be painting a self-portrait in my sketchbook. This video will be a little different than my previous ones. I attempted to have 2 camera angles, and I've edited it slightly different. So throughout the video you'll see parts that are in real time, and parts that are close up and from a different angle, such as the one you're seeing right now. Most of the time you'll only see the close-up shots when it comes to the face, because in the overhead shot, my hand will be covering any detail work that I do there. However, there is a spot in the video where I forgot to press record, so there's a large section of the hand that you'll get a close-up of too. Anyways, as with all the other videos of me painting, right now I'm just blocking in all the base colors to help dictate the tone of the painting. As you can see from my hand, I have a very pink undertone, so all the colors I'm using will also have a very pink base to them. Throughout the layering process, I have a tendency to desaturate my colors, so having these strong hues and shadows now will help me later on. I'll do less of a good job with this when it comes to the hands, and especially so when it comes to that right hand right there. I'd say it's because I'm lazy, but it's also not the main focus. I do, however, try to focus on the lips more, as they're going to be a big focus of this painting, especially with the perspective, so hopefully you'll see an improvement between this and the last painting. I personally see an improvement, so I'm happy with it. Especially because I never paint or draw teeth, so it's a new thing to me. And you can really tell this by how long it takes me to figure out what I'm doing. I would like to add, however, that even though this is a self-portrait, it's a more flattering version of myself than reality. I think that's understandable though, because who wants to spend time painting layers upon layers of the same flaw that they can't even look in the mirror at? So just know that my teeth might not be as straight, my hair might not be as full as it appears, and I'm not finely sculpted in every aspect of my face. Such is reality, so I'm gonna have fun with my painting. I also don't have stormy eyes, nor have I had flying insects just delicately placed on me, which to me is a more unfortunate reality than my face actually is. Since I've last talked about what I've been doing in the painting, I've started to transition from that saturated and chunky first layer and have started to even out the tone while adding more detail. My main area of focus right now is the mouth and the nose. Not only are these the main focal point of the painting, but typically these areas also tend to have the most tonal variation. So making sure that I have the right highlight points and the right shadows, along with the varying tones that will be in thinner areas, especially for the nostrils and the edges of the mouth, will help to really push forward the realism in the face. Because of this, you'll see me go for these areas the most. Personally, this is always my favorite part to watch, because adding the tiniest bit of paint can make the biggest difference. So the face tends to change drastically from one moment to the next. And you can really see this as I add highlights to this area. It tends to sculpt the features in a certain direction. As I've mentioned before in my previous videos, focusing more on the highlights and shadows in your paintings or drawings or whatever will really help to sell the illusion of a 3D object. Our eyes are trained to see these differences, especially because that's how vision works. So when they're off, they really feel off, which is fine for certain styles, but I like my styles to be more realistic. Anyway, I'll continue to do this process onto the hand, which is also sort of a focal point considering it's the closest to the viewer. I'll also try to continue to disperse the skin tone so that it's even among all parts of this painting. meaning that everything will have a similar tone when finished, which is important if you want it to look like everything belongs to the same person. By now you may be wondering why I haven't done any shadows. Highlights have really been my main concern up to this point. I think for me personally, I like to see the shapes forming forwards before I give them more depth. My brain works better working from the ground up, and since shadows add more distance, it's more like taking away from something that already exists. I'd imagine that if I were to work with clay, I'd do much better adding clay on top of a structure instead of carving from a block of clay, if that makes sense. I will be defining more shadows and features though, as you can see right now, and that's because I'm at the part of the painting where in order for things to be more forward, some things have to be pushed far back. It's also because I've been neglecting the eyes up to this point, and they need to be done to progress any further. I'll also be pushing the shadows under the lip and where the fingers are pulling down the skin, because those places should be much further back than the surrounding areas. As of right now, those areas are a little chunky. They'll be smoothed out a bunch more as the process goes on, especially since I'll be flipping from highlights and shadows to really fine-tune and detail things. As a viewer, I imagine it might be annoying to see me go over the same spot a bunch of times, so I apologize for you having to bear through it. I too get annoyed with my process, but I think it's important to see what patience can achieve. This next part is always my favorite portion of painting. I guess you could call it the fine lining of painting. It's where I get to clean up edges and detail things more directly. It's also where the painting really takes a step up. I do go over this fine lining a bit, just so certain areas, like the eyebrows, blend more naturally. You'll see that in the next few seconds. They look like they belong more on my face, because in real life, my eyebrows are not super dark and prominent, so it feels weird when they are. But not to say that looks weird on everyone. Just on me. So now we're at that portion of the video that I talked about earlier, where I forgot to resume the overhead camera. So you're stuck with this up-close version of what I'm painting, which works fine for the details of the face, but feels a little awkward and uncomfortable for the hand. I felt it important to leave in though, because similar to the face, these next few steps really change how the hand looks, and that's mainly due to the fine lining type of painting that I do, but also because I'm really trying to push the shadows and the hues in the hand right now. Similar to the face, this process takes a bit of patience. You'll see me add blocks of colors a lot of the time, and then smooth them out with my finger and go over it with a light wash of color. And I'll just keep repeating this process until it looks right. Eventually it does get there, but I find it important not to skip this step or rush it, because like what I said before, this really helps to create depth and push certain parts backwards while others are more forward, which once again is how 3D objects work, just highlights and shadows that your eye interprets. When I'm finelining this hand, you'll really see a stark difference between the beginning of what it looks like and what it ends up looking like. It always amazes me how I can go from kind of hating something to actually end up liking it just in the matter of a few seconds. I think it's because it really defines the shapes that I have spent so much time shading. It's the moment where all the prep work finally starts to pay off. Before this moment, you kind of just have to put in that effort and hope that it will turn out alright, but at this moment, you finally get to see that hope turn into reality, which I think is pretty cool. But I also think it's my favorite part because I can finally see that finishing line. From this point forward, the painting will seem to go by a lot quicker, especially because most of what's left won't require as much detail as the face and hands do. Although I didn't put much effort into the detail work for this second hand that I'm working on right now. It gets a little better the more that I work on it, but I really should have taken the time to push those shadows more than I did. As you can see, I spent a lot less time working on this hand than I did with the other one, and because of that, it falls a little flat in the end. As I'm about to start on the hair, I forgot to mention that my followers on Instagram helped me to decide some things in this painting. One such thing was the color in which I would paint my hair. I didn't really say it would be for my hair, but I gave 3 color options: brown, blue, and gray, which are all colors that my hair has been dyed. Blue was the most voted, so that's what you're seeing here. It's also the color I secretly wished it was, so I'm happy about that. Some other things that I had you guys decide were the color of my eyes and what insect I would include. For my eyes, I gave 3 sky options. Clear blue skies would be my normal eyes, cloudy and stormy would be what you see here, and the night sky would be black. Most people chose stormy, which is also what I wanted. For the insect, there were also 3 options, and those options were a moth, a cicada, and a beetle. The beetle technically won the poll, but when it came to sketching, I just couldn't make it work. So I went with the second highest, which was moth. And even then, I didn't really do moth in the right way. They look more like the cartoony Disney moths that you see, which are essentially just little white butterflies. The polls really were just for fun though, so I think it's fine. With that out of the way, let's get back to what I'm doing in the painting. You may have noticed that I've started to add some highlights to the hair. This, once again, is to just create more of a depth and bring pieces forward. Without it, the hair would just fall flat because it's just one color. I've chopped up the editing some so you kind of see large sections being completed at a time, which is pretty fun to watch. The highlights, by the way, are just the base color with white added. Nothing super fancy. Similarly, the shadows that I'm adding right now are just the base color with a little bit brown black. I'm adding shadows at the opposite of the highlights to create that depth, because the further away you get from a highlight, the darker it will become. I jumped to doing the background here because I always forget to do this before I start the hair. I chose this mustard yellow because it's a good complement to the blue. I also realized that this is the same color scheme that's in my room currently. My walls are a deeper desaturated blue and I have accents of this mustard yellow, so I guess it's a perfect color scheme for my own self-portrait. Anyway, the reason I decided to finish the yellow before finishing the hair is so that I don't have to cut in with the yellow later on. It is much easier to do fine hair-like detail over a solid color than to not paint over that hair-like detail with a background, which totally makes sense. I just forget to do it 9 times out of 10. The ability to forget about things like that and be able to still work around it is what makes me want to be a digital artist from time to time. But I'm not fancy enough for that, so I guess I'll stick with my pain and misery. Although I suppose that it comes with its own pain and misery, such as losing your file or programs crashing. Back to the painting. This is my final highlight layer, and after this, the painting should be done. I'm doing my highlights with a Posca pen, and that's because it's just easy. The highlights that I'm adding right now are sort of like fine details. They're to represent the reflection of light that you'd get from like water or oil in this case. So most of them are speckled or very, very little. I'm also using the Posca pen to do sort of a rim lighting. This appears on the edge of the face, a little bit on the hand, and around the hair. And with the addition of tiny little speckles, that's just about it. If you'd like to see more videos from me, feel free to subscribe. I plan on doing monthly videos for 2020, but I might do more occasionally. Also feel free to follow me on Instagram at chunter_art. I do a lot more posting of my art there. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.